That's a very complicated question for a psychiatrist. You ask, how would you describe yourself? Um, Look, to someone who's seeing me on the street, they'll see me as a middle-aged person of Indian origin. Um, how I feel inside, I am decidedly Indian first. But given that I've lived my life outside of India much more than I have in India, I think I'm probably a bit more than just being Indian, though it's very hard for me to capture what that bit more is. And if your question is to mean that leave all of those external things aside and who are you as a person? Perhaps the adjective that I would like to use about myself is curious. I have always been curious and have always been drawn to novelty. So I like new things. I like doing new things. That's probably why I am where I am. It's interesting that I say I'm an Indian first because I was born in Montreal. But I was born of Indian parents. My parents were there because my father was doing his postgraduate work there. But then I returned to India with my parents, and I grew up in India for the first 22 years of my life. So, and that makes you. Those early memories, the acculturation. I grew up in Chandigarh, in Punjab. That is who you become. Everything else thereafter is kind of window dressing in a way. And of course, I'm a neuroscientist. I also study how the brain works and how the brain develops. And what are, the way your brain is formed through early experiences. And if for that many years you have felt a certain weather, you have spoken a certain language, you have seen certain things, you have participated in certain rituals, that is who you are and that is who you become. Now, as it happens for me, after those first 20 or so years, then I lived in the US for about 5, Canada for about 15, the UK for about 15, and Australia for 5. But I think, as they say, you can take the Indian out of India, but you can't take the India out of the person. So I think that's how I am Indian. It's very interesting. It's very hard for an individual to know what really motivates them. Of course, I could state to you, socially desirable things about what moves me. But I would say that let's break it up into 2 aspects of it. I'm a physician and I do science, and now I'm a university leader. So perhaps insofar as the scientific aspects are concerned, there is probably nothing particularly Indian about it, because science is a very secularized and a very standardized and you might even say a very sanitized enterprise. There is no room for person in science. In fact, the very point of science is to take the person out of it and let it stand on its facts. So I don't think in that aspect of my life it probably affects me. In the rest of the roles I do, probably the aspects of my heritage that I carry around, which I wouldn't say are in any way unique to Indians, but probably expressed a little bit more in that culture than others, is a sense of respect, an innate respect for elders and tradition. And let me give you a very interesting example. When I left India as a physician, I went and started doing at one time PhD in Toronto. And my supervisor was Professor Gregory Brown. And I walk into his office the first day and I call him Professor, and he says, "No, just call me Greg." It was really hard for me. I could not, for the first year, to where it almost became a joke, that I would walk in and I got away from calling him Professor, then I'd call him Sir. And he found that even more ridiculous because in Canada, Sir is like seen as this British title that no one... So, but it was genuinely hard for me. felt to me if I was transgressing a boundary. It took me a year to get over it. I finally did get over it, and I've asked myself, what was lost and what was gained? And I realized that if the purpose of our scientific relationship was for me to be able to be truly open and question, it was hard for me to truly question till I kept calling him Professor Brown. There was something that opened up when I called him Greg. I, in some sense, also symbolized, even though, I mean, he was always as open to me. So now perhaps there was something lost too. But I realized the value on why he wanted me to call him Greg. But he was a great professor. Look, as life would have it, my family's moved around a bit. My parents are actually in the United States now, as is my brother, as is my wife's only sister. But the one anchor of our relationships who's there is my mother-in-law in Calcutta. So that is a living anchor to Calcutta. And it's a wonderful link that I have with her. Now, of course, I don't get to see her very often, so our relationship often is on WhatsApp. So we're a WhatsApp family. So that is one big link. I think the second big link would be food. I love Indian food. And to me, it was an adult homecoming, because in India, I was always trying to eat pizza or, something like hamburgers. They were new when I was in India. And then that was the thing. And I really didn't know how to cook. Frankly, I did not think it was my place to cook. And it was after I came to the States and Canada that I developed a true appreciation for what an important, first, what a wonderful cuisine it is. But secondly, what a remarkably critical role Indian cuisine plays in Indian society and culture. Every culture eats, but the place they give food in their culture is different. And I think food has a very central place in Indian culture. So I cook. It is a genuine pleasure for me to cook. I really love to really read recipes, compare them, and cook. And then, of course, it's movies. And now, of course, increasingly it's Netflix rather than Bollywood. But no, I still love some Bollywood films of my generation. So yes, as I look back on my life, what I would tell that young Shitij is that life is not a race. So I sort of thought, or I always felt that it was a race. And now when I look back, I realized it was a journey. The difference is, I feel I did not take enough time to take in the journey. I thought it was about getting somewhere, and where you get somewhere, and you realize now it's about getting somewhere else. And finally it dawns upon you, it isn't about getting anywhere. It is about the journey. And if all you did was got from place to place, you actually missed the point of what it was all about. It was the scenery around you, not the stations that come. So look, how much if someone would have told me that, I would have changed my behavior? I don't know. Because I would have, at that point, it wouldn't have. So even if this older Shitij would have told that young Shitij that, I would have taken it as, yeah, it's one of those sayings. But I think today I appreciate the meaning of that. And to the degree that this might resonate with someone young, I would request them to think of this as more than a saying and see what it might mean for them. It'll mean different things for different people. But if there is one lesson, I mean, I've had a wonderfully privileged and a richly lived life, but I think it would have been experientially even richer if I had seen it as a journey and not a race. All I hope is that I'm maybe getting better in my older days. I must say that I was inspired, but would in no way wish to suggest that I equal. But I hold it as an inspiration. And it would be trite to say that it was my father, but I'll tell you, why it is my father, but in a different way. So my father was a professor. He was finally a dean at the Punjab Engineering College in Chandigarh. But I don't think that, I mean, that is wonderful, and in many ways it's probably shaped me. But the part of his story that inspires me is how he came to be that, not that he was that. And that is because he was a refugee. And the two elements of that is one, of course, the personal struggle that many children of the partition had. So he was born in what is present-day Pakistan. So he was one of those stories you hear of people who were displaced and their families lost everything and they built it back. But the part that inspired me is what he did for the rest of his family. And I think that to me stays an inspiration. This seems funny now, but it didn't seem funny when it happened. When I was growing up in Chandigarh and Delhi, I did not like the cold. And I actually have a picture of mine which shows you how much I did not like the cold. And generally, honestly, in Delhi, even 10 degrees centigrade used to feel like very cold because, of course, the windows, you were all drafty and there was no central heating. So little was I to know that life will land me next into Toronto, Canada. And I still remember the first day I had left from India. I was wearing my special sweater that was knitted for me, and I'm landing here in -20. I had no clue of what -20 feels like. And I have to say, it took me a year of mistakes. I'm a slow learner, of leaving home without gloves, leaving home without covering for the head, leaving home without long johns, to finally figure out how does one live in a cold environment. But I'll tell you the pride I take in, and sometimes you almost overcompensate, that then I actually became a fan of winter camping. And I would then go camp in the -20s. And not only would I camp in the -20s, I would take paranthas and make them in -20. Now, you can't, by the way, make paranthas in -20, because the problem is in -20 when you're camping, your paranthas are all frozen. So you, in fact, start from a frozen state, and all that you can do is actually thaw them to eat them. So yes, so it was an interesting journey from Delhi, where I thought that 10 degrees centigrade was unbearable, to where, 20 years later in Canada, I would seek out the cold to live in it. And I think probably, the message from all of that is that we do not know what opportunities lie within us. If you would have, in my Delhi state, said, do you want to go to Toronto, live in the cold and camp, and you might even enjoy it, I would have not found it imaginable. Just as today, people always complain about the London weather when I meet people who are not from London. But I genuinely say this, and I don't think this is, about making a virtue out of a necessity. I find something pretty calming about our grey weather, because it just has a sort of tempering effect, such that when the sun then shows, it seems like a special gift from God. Whereas if you're in Delhi or Florida, you forget that gift of God. So yes, so that's been my lessons and learning. Look, that was a difficult journey, because I was at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. My family was very excited that I got into medicine. Everyone had huge expectations from me. So when I said I wanted to become a psychiatrist, there was a lot of suspicion and, dare I say, some disappointment amongst my friends, even amongst some of my medical mentors, because they wanted me to do what they thought was something really useful, like cardiology or, what have you. But I was inspired by Professor N.N. Wig, who was probably the most prominent Indian psychiatrist at that time and then became the head of mental health for WHO. But I think what I could also see, that there was a truth in there that in the fullness of time, neither culture nor tradition can deny. So depression is depression. It happens in every society. And you may choose to call it different things, but it doesn't take the pain away, and nor does it make the solutions any easier. And I think my adult life has seen that that severe mental illness is probably equally distributed across nations, across races, across different areas. Mild to moderate expressions of mental illness are probably culturally influenced to a greater degree. So yes, it was a tough choice to make, but I'm so thankful I did. So what is left for me to do? I think it's a privilege for me to be a president of King's College London. And first, I feel that in this job, there is a lot more for me to learn. And it is a privilege in many ways to lead, close to 10,000 colleagues and serve 40,000 students. And so for my next few years have to be devoted to doing that better, because I definitely see that there are things I can do better. Then there'll come a day I'll have to give it up. Maybe there'll be another job, but one day there will be no job. What will I do then? So I'll tell you what preoccupies me at the moment. It is cooking on high heat in a tandoor. So my next game is how to get really good at that. And of course, there are not too many tandoors available here now, but there are these Komodo barbecues that are coming, which are really ceramic barbecues, really the Japanese version of a tandoor. So that's the next big task. Look, I really like making a layered biryani. But the proper making of a layered biryani takes so long that often I cheat a little bit. But if I do have the time, then taking the time to creating each of the layers properly and then, composing them together and then baking them for the one last time is really, really good. So, a game that I remember very well is Gulli Danda. And it just has a very interesting sort of image in my mind because it was relatively simple, still required a remarkable amount of skill, and almost anyone could play it because you could fashion it out of nothing. And then, of course, as I went to school, it graduated to cricket, which was much more complicated than Gulli Danda. But I have to say something about cricket. I was a great fan of cricket, and I used to love to keep the score. Now, young people may find this very odd, but I could buy a book, listen to the commentary, and keep the score. What the purpose of that is entirely unclear to me, because no one was waiting for me to score the game. The game was being scored and I was listening to the commentary. But as a young child, it gave me a lot of pressure to just keep the score, which is entirely superfluous. But one thing it did lead to was that I then became an umpire in inter-school cricket. But I have to share with you something that lies with me. That takes us back to the mid-1980s. Bishan Singh Bedi used to bowl at that point in time. And in my head, I had the knowledge that this Indian cricketer was one of the first cricketers to play in English county cricket. And I couldn't even say the names of these English counties properly. I think I called them Gloucestershire or something like that. And I don't know, he played for one of these shires. And I was so proud that one Indian cricketer can play in the English county cricket. I could not have imagined that a time would come in my lifetime that something like the IPL would be the world's richest sporting league. But what I could not have imagined, that players from all over the world would be vying to come and be a part of that. And I think all of us need to reflect on not only the growth of India, but the change of its place in the world that has happened at least within one lifetime. This is nothing short of a miracle to me. When you look at the sort of scale of stressors in life, moving to a new country, exciting as it might be, moving away from family, and starting university, when all put together, are one of the extreme stressors. So it's a very positive thing. It is a gift in many ways and a privilege in many ways, but it is a huge stressor. And I think this should not daunt anyone. This is not a reason not to do it. It's a reason to be honest and open about the stressful dimension of it. And even though you may have seen London in pictures and, you may have, this is a tough move. So I think what is very critical for students is to appreciate the toughness of it, and what protects you from it are your social networks and the new networks that you can form. So the importance of hanging on to some of the networks that you have as you make the transition, but then actively invest the time in creating new networks that ground you in your new place. Because otherwise, you always remain a bit of a, sort of satellite, if you may. But if despite all of these efforts, it's not working, and it's very difficult for that young person to then acknowledge to the family back home, because the family has invested so much hope and so much money to send them abroad. They just want it to be a marvelous success story, and anything that takes away from it is often not admissible. I think it is then the honesty to recognize that there is a challenge. The good thing is now that on almost all the universities, there is very good recognition of it. There is help available, and it's a tiered help. And the first help is from other peers, and not just friends, but peers who you would find in all the counseling services, people like you who've gone through this before, who are now willing to share that example. And I think if that is not enough, that is when one should seek, I would say without any hesitation at all. Because, if you go back to the story that I was telling, what it used to be 25 to 30 years ago, we have made that journey, and I don't think young people today should be held back by that. You see, it's very interesting. There is the glamorization, which is almost making it sort of social desirable. So this is now something socially desirable, like a Gucci bag, and you might have it. And I think that element is small, but it's probably there, and not helpful if it is. I think the more challenging element for society is to what extent to normalize it, and to what extent to medicalize it. And the difference to me would be that if we are normalizing it, we are then relying on your own resources, or for you to gather the resources to actually tend to it. If you medicalize it, you're in some sense transferring the agency to someone else. So antibiotics, it's good that your doctor gives you antibiotics, but actually daily exercise is something that you do. He or she does not come take your hand, take you out, nor the pharmacist doesn't take you for the walk. So I think what we as a society now need to come to terms with, that there is this large element of daily distress, the responses to which lie in our hands. And we would have to develop those techniques, be they exercise, be they meditation, be they yoga, be they whatever it is that works for you, piano, be it learning a new thing that distracts you from some of the, is that agency needs to be rightfully returned to the person. And I would be wary of a society which lands up medicalizing more than it can deliver. I mean, if you look at the NHS, we've got waiting lists for people who need hip surgery. So the idea that a system like that can take on other challenges is not going to be feasible. So in some sense, almost all of this new understanding about well-being and health that is coming, just as diet, that agency needs to be put back in the hands of the person, because I do not think there is another social answer. I don't think that a body like the NHS can actually, it can provide advice, but advice is freely available on the net. But that's where I'm saying that glamorization is one aspect, and I think it affects, but it's a small part of society. I think where to draw the line between a normalized response, in which we are relying back on you, to a medicalized response where the agency lies with someone else. We've got to get that balance right. And at this point in time, I think all societies are struggling as to where is that line. And there'll never be. But we do need to recognize that there is a line there. You know, we have in India one psychiatrist for something like 33,000 people. There are more Indian psychiatrists outside of India than there are Indian psychiatrists in India. How in any imagination can they be the first answer for anything? They're not even enough to be the last answer in a properly triaged system. So I worry that in a society where faith, family relationships, these are absolutely critical elements for securing your well-being. They've done that for 2,000 years. So we've got to be very careful in giving up on the efficacy, and I actually mean on the real my life. So when I was growing up in India, I was in a medical school. Yoga was something these other people did, and I couldn't actually see the relationship. Then when I came to the West, I started training about this. As a psychiatrist, people did talk about meditation and yoga, and I thought, this is kind of an alternative technique that is being, offered to people. But I've now come to realize what a powerful force it can be in the area of self-efficacy. That it is a powerful tool for people to take in their own hands. And it's both meditation and yoga, and you can draw the line where you wish for yourself, to where they have become an intrinsic part of my own life. So, I've practiced Bikram yoga for many years now, and I do that with some regularity. But since that takes a lot of time and you've got to go outside of the home, I've also added to that sort of a practice of meditative Kriya yoga every day if I can manage it, but certainly several times a week. And look, it's very hard to draw the relationship of how it contributes to your wellness. But I certainly know the time before and after that practice, and I can certainly see the difference. And it is certainly helpful in a job like this, which is largely a job of mental worries. My job is not physically demanding. I don't have to lift anything, but I do, worry about things. And there is a point beyond which that worry is not productive. I'm not solving anything other than taking up my own mental space. And if anything, that is decreasing my ability to solve things later. So I found that yoga has been a very, very helpful role for me. And I would urge others, the beauty is there isn't one kind of yoga. So it's really like the Western pharmacopoeia. There are many versions of it. There are different doses of it. You can choose the one you like. And it's endlessly flexible to your needs and times. So I would strongly make a pitch for it, because there is very strong evidence that it actually makes a difference.